well, I think you can imagine, after all that had happened in my research fellowship, what a joy it was to finally be needed again, to be a hero once more. And in those first few weeks I was walking on air. It was the best thing I'd ever done. And I really felt I could teach anything and everything. I'm not going to say no, because this is, this is the best thing. I'm going to show them that I can take it all on. And whatever I was doing, I just walked through the department with a big grin on my face. And sort of in colloquial language, you could say that what I was experiencing was in fact one big ego trip. And what I'm going to do first in this video is give you a raw reflection of what I felt at the time. In fact, it's more reflexive than reflective, because it's about the immediate, what were the raw feelings that I felt at the time. So without any attempt of evaluating that or analyzing it even. I'm going to do that in the second part of the video. The one strong thing that comes to mind was a feeling of responsibility. Because when you're a hero, of course, the good things and the bad things are all happening because of you. And there were a few situations in particular that stand out in my memory. I can't remember everything of that time, but a few things I just like to mention. One thing happened quite early on, as it was October when I started. Several level 4 students approached me and they asked, Dr. Brady, what's your area of expertise? Oh, I had to think about that, and it made me very uncomfortable, because I've done a PhD on context-dependent memory, but does that make me an expert in that field? I didn't think so, and I had this fear that students would find out sooner or later that they knew more than I did. And at that time was the same time when the Diederik Stapel fraud scandal came to light. Now, he was my boss and my work colleague, had been earlier on, so I felt quite a strong connection with that, and I thought, oh dear, am I a fraud? Am I a fraud just like him? A second situation occurred with actually the same group of students, level 4s. I had to give her a bad mark. I think it was a 12 on an essay, and we were chatting along in my office, and then came the moment I had to break the news to her. And the moment I did that, the moment I said, you got 12, she looked at me and I could just see, her expression was changing, and almost sort of hate. And I felt, is it my fault? I've somehow put the knowledge, I'm responsible for putting the knowledge in her head, but it's not coming out, so somewhere along the line I must have made a mistake. Something positive that happened, because most of the time it was fantastic. Something I did in a level 2 lecture was a live experiment to explain a concept of priming, and at the time I deemed that a great success, because it was a bit risky. I didn't know whether I was going to actually find support for my hypothesis, but I did, and after all the excitement I managed to calm all those students down again and continue with the lecture. So I thought, ka-ching, paid off. But of course I didn't, at the time even, I thought, how do I actually know? How do I know that it stuck in their minds? And I had no idea. Another positive thing that happened at the time with those same level 2 students was that I got them, well, I gave them an experiment that I'd done myself that hadn't been published, but I just wanted them to have a look at it and tell me what they thought, whether they could see any flaws in it, whether there was anything I could improve. And I said, let me know if you have any thoughts. A few days later I got an email from a group of them. They grouped together and sent me this. First of all, let us thank you for actually giving students the opportunity to voice their opinions. It really means a lot in a world where authority and status sometimes create a barrier between the ones who teach and the ones who are taught. And if we're to make the whole university experience better for everyone, such interaction is invaluable. Now I read that and I just was filled with a real glow. I thought, this is fantastic. I've done something worthwhile. I've got through to them. I feel we're on each other's level. And maybe I've done something that none of the other lecturers has done. I can do anything with these students. I've got them now. It was an amazing feeling. I felt really so proud in a way. Well, that same week, something quite the opposite happened. I can't get over the irony of it. I had an appraisal meeting with my boss, and he said something to the extent of, we didn't hire you for your teaching skills, nice as they may be. Anyone can teach, but admin, that's what not everyone can do. And I thought he was having a laugh, because how can someone think that for a job as a teaching fellow, that teaching skills are not important? And so part of me laughed, but the other part of me felt really sad, because what I loved the most about my job apparently did not matter. Now this, what happened in the appraisal meeting, that had some other effects on the way I was thinking about myself. I shall talk about that in the second part of the video. Because what I'm going to look at now is reflect from a distance. So I've now sort of described the raw feelings, but now I'm going to look at a bit more of analysis. Where did my feelings actually come from? So tear them apart a bit. And I will come to the conclusion that they stemmed from actually my own needs and from the way I believed that students learn. So after I have analyzed, I am going to evaluate and look at, have I actually been an effective educator so far? And then I'm going to look at the current state, the now. How have I changed in the way I teach and my attitude since the start of the PT Cert course? And looking ahead, what's my next steps? What have I identified that I need to do next? So let's have a look at my feelings. The things I experienced in those first months, years, were fear for being discovered as a fraud, fear for not knowing enough, guilt about students getting bad marks, and a more general sense of being responsible for what students learned. Now actually thinking about that, reflecting on it, what I realized was all this is actually based on my idea of how students learn. When I came to think of it, I realized that I treat students as if they were clay, which in terms of Fox, that is quite a simple theory as opposed to a developed one. But when students are clay, the sculptor, the tutor, can be the hero. They can mold the students in any shape they want, and they're responsible for that. And you can feel fear if your skills as a sculptor are not good enough, if you don't have the right tools, and so the actual end product might not turn out the way you want it to. But there were some other things that I thought about. Some clay that I worked with was really tough. Some clay was plain unworkable, and what I felt was that the university bought the wrong clay. And I felt resentment as well as fear, guilt, and feelings of responsibility. I really felt it's the university's fault for giving me stuff that I can't work with. I'll come back to that later. The other side of fear was rejection. So the feeling that they don't love me anymore. That's quite easy to see where that comes from. It comes from my own needs, and going back quite a long way into my life, the need to be accepted, to have friends, and as a coping mechanism, coping mechanism, being intellectually superior, my only weapon to defend myself in the world. But, seeing as I'm an adult, I'm mature in my knowledge now, or more mature than I started out with, can I somehow override these quite basic needs with a greater need to be an effective educator? I'll come back to that later as well. Because the big problem I had in my mind, and I actually only realized this a few weeks ago when I started on this assignment, was this realization: am I teaching for selfish reasons? Do I just want to be a hero? Do I just want to fulfill my own needs? And it really bugged me, and I had a few quite black days because of it. I really thought I had to go back to the drawing board and analyze my reasons for things. But then I thought about the appraisal meeting again, and really sort of analyzed those feelings a bit deeper. We didn't hire you for your teaching skills. Anyone can teach. And at the time, the first feeling I felt was rejection. They don't want me for. I'm nothing special. What I do, what I love most about my job, can easily be replaced by somebody else. But the second feeling was that of anger, quite deep anger and quite strong anger. How do they have the audacity to say that anyone can teach, when I know jolly well from talking to other people, from lecturers in my department, that not everybody can teach. It's only anecdotal evidence, but I know that some people loathe teaching, they hate it, and they want to have it over with. Now, I know that not liking something and being good at it or bad at it are not the same things. It doesn't necessarily imply one or the other, but if you don't like something, it does reduce the chances of you being good at it. Some lecturers teach with a terrible attitude, lecture slides full of notes, not responding to students, and how can my boss say that anyone can teach if it's so obvious that not everybody can? Why do we have a PG Cert course if anyone can teach? And as I realized that, as I got that feeling of anger, I also was overcome with a great feeling of relief, because I realized then that I'm not teaching for selfish reasons, but that I am passionate about education as a whole. I'm passionate about it being done properly, about creating a high teaching quality leading to high quality learning. And what really motivates me, and that's what I've got out of thinking about this situation, what motivates me is wanting to get the best out of every student. Not every student might be able to get an A, but if the best a student can do is a B, then I want to help that student to get to that B. So it was actually a really positive experience going through this roller coaster of emotions. So now I've analyzed all my feelings and motivations. I want to look at the evaluative side of things, and have I actually been effective as an educator? The first thing I like to look at is my approach to teaching. And now this comes from the inventory approach to teaching inventory from Prosser and Tridwell, the thing we did in one of the workshops. Now, as you can see here, is I'm more teacher focused than I am student focused, but neither of the columns is rock bottom or at the ceiling. So there is they're both around the middle, with one being slightly higher. So the questions I asked myself was, when do I use which? Is it so that my approach is always slightly more teacher focused than student focused? Is it always a mix of the two? Or do I apply one approach to, say, level 1 and another approach to level 4 students? Does that change? And is it actually the best approach for each level, or should I do things differently? Well, it was actually worth looking back at something I said to my students last year even. Bloom's revised taxonomy. I showed it to them. The first time I actually came across it, I thought this is brilliant, because it really maps onto the way I teach across the different levels. At level 1, I'm more teacher focused, because I believe that, well, it's not just I, but the department as a whole, we get students to focus on the broad picture, not a lot of little facts, and we want them to remember all that. And the emphasis is on recall, so the focus of the teacher is really to convey all this information to them. And I explained to my students that, okay, that's what we do at level 1, and then at level 4, all that you've learned in the preceding years should enable you to create new information, to generate new ideas, and have a different outlook on the world. So at level 4, I am more student focused. Now, one thing that probably struck you as well, but it was quite in my face when I first looked at this picture and the way I teach, was that there's a very clear overlap between, a clear link between my approach to teaching and my theories of learning. So I started to do some more reflection. So I see students as clay. So at level 1, what that means is that I see students as pliable clay. You can do something with them. I can shape them because I'm the sculptor, and I love shaping because it's my skill being turned into this lovely statue. Whereas at level 4, students, they're still clay, but they've been molded by other tutors. They've been shaped, and not always into the correct shape. But they're level 4. They've been clay for quite a while, and they've got solidified. You can't shape clay that's already solidified. So what else can I do than to just let them get on with it? So yes, at level 1 I'm tutor-centered, and at level 4 I am student-centered, but this student-centeredness at level 4 is not really for the right reasons. It's more a laissez-faire approach based on hopelessness. Is that correct? I'll tell you later. Yeah, that was the one thing I meant to say here, that I enjoy level 1 teaching, and I do not really enjoy level 4 teaching. Why is that? Well, I think it's because at level 4 I have no role. The sculptor can't sculpt, whereas at level 1 there's all the scope for the sculptor to be a hero, to show off these beautiful pieces that he has shaped. Now at level 2, and I'm not teaching level 3, I only do level 1, 2 and 4. Level 2 is a bit in the middle. There's sort of semi-solid clay. They have been shaped to some extent, but they're not solidified yet. There is still time. If I keep them moving, just like you do with concrete, it won't solidify if it keeps moving. So what do I need to do is I need to stimulate their minds, keep stimulating them so they won't solidify. And that's, I think, why I enjoy level 2 students the most, because they have something to work with, and I have a chance to correct things and be a hero, and I have time to shape them even more into the way I want to. It's quite a scary thought, my view of students as clay, when I think about it. So, students as clay, is that correct? Well, in the course of the PG Cert, it's not so much that I learned that I think this way, but I've been made aware that I think this way. And as soon as I became aware that this is the view I've got, I realized that this can't possibly be true. It's impossible. And then, as I started to learn all the background theories, I realized that, of course, students have got their own background knowledge. They've got their own motivation. They've got their own learning approaches, learning styles, learning strategies. They're not clay. It's not up to me to shape them. It's my task to help them integrate information into their existing schemas, but they're not a blank sheet, not by any means. So I started to think about my teacher focusedness at level 1, and I thought, is this actually what we're teaching them? Is this leading to them taking a surface approach to learning? We're giving them lots of information. Our assessments are multiple choice. They've got to learn this broad range. Is that right? Does it have to be surface? And then they've complained about it themselves, that they actually would like to go a bit deeper. But on the other hand, there are certain things at level 1 that they simply need to know. For example, how to reference according to the conventions in psychology, how to structure a report. We don't really want them to reinvent the wheel, if you like, because there is a standard way that is scientific convention. And that works. That's what we use to communicate with other scientists. So if we can't be fully teacher focused, we can't be fully student focused either. Perhaps there can be a happy medium. And I think this is what we have to do, is to be teacher focused, but not with a focus on transmitting information per se, but transmitting concepts, the values of the discipline. And the key thing there is constructive alignment. You get surface learning if students just get the information transmitted to them, and they know what they have to do for the exam, and they might even take a strategic approach. But if it stops at the exam, then obviously that's not going to make them engage with the material. It's not going to make them learn any deeper. So what I need to do is make sure that I explain to students why do they do certain things, what do they have to do when they graduate, what sort of skills are important, what knowledge is important, how does that relate to what they do in class, and how is the assessment an indicator of how well they have mastered that skill. If they understand that, we might still or say get away with, but we might be able to do a teacher-focused approach, but it doesn't just lead to surface learning, but it does actually lead to deep learning. So now I'd like to talk about a few specific things. So based on what I've talked about so far, based on my approach, about my background, do I actually think that the things I did were effective? And importantly, how do I know? So when I asked my level 2 students opinion about my experiment, what that enabled them to do was be active. They were actively involved with this topic. I asked them a question. I prodded their minds during a lecture where normally they might have been more passive. And Biggs has shown that when students are active, they're more likely to engage in deep learning. Something else, of course, that happened was students felt included in the psychology community. So what it did for them was increase their legitimate peripheral participation. They felt part of it. Because they felt part of it, they felt perhaps respected, valued. That might have increased their intrinsic motivation and in turn their deep learning. So was it effective? I think yes, it was. And something else related to this was that it turned the lecture into an interaction. It wasn't just students learning from me, but me actually learning from my students. And I think when students realize that the lecturer genuinely is interested in them and takes in what they're saying and learns from them, that, just like legitimate peripheral participation, it increases their internal motivation and helps them connect to the material. Something else that I did then, that was the in-lecture experiment, explaining students about priming. When I looked at Summative and Bain's levels of teaching, it very much corresponded to their third level, which is teaching to facilitate understanding. So it's about taking quite a difficult concept and enabling students to see that in a simpler fashion, relating it to something everyday. In this case, relating it to something fun. Was I effective? And how did I know? I think I was effective because the students laughed. The only way they could have laughed was if they'd understood the joke. So that's how I could tell that they got the meaning of priming. So that was sort of the immediate feeling that I had. Oh, yes, it worked. But then, in that gloomy time I had a few weeks ago, I thought, I made them laugh. Did I just do it for the laugh? Or, no, it wasn't anything behind it. Was I just trying to be a hero? Well, that was 3 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, I had a rethink, and I thought, well, should it always be either or? And could it not be that, okay, it was my moment of glory, I probably made myself popular by doing that, but they also had probably an example that they would never forget, because I shan't go into details, but it really was quite a memorable occasion. So can the two not go together? I will talk more about the effectiveness a little later. The other thing I did was in the level 2 lectures was asking students to watch The Apprentice on BBC and then try to apply the social psychology theories to the series and see if they could spot particular evidence for things based on a checklist that I'd given them. So what I got them to do was apply their theories to real-world situations. two things I think could have followed from that. One is more intrinsic motivation, because they could see how their sort of textbook theories were linked to something real life, something they were actually interested in, because many of them were watching it. And in turn, and at the same time, it could have led to deep learning, because they could see how it was applied. So they didn't just have one isolated example of a theory, but they could sort of embed it into a wider context. And it could have led to conceptual change. They would probably never look at The Apprentice in the same way again, but they would always immediately spot the theories and the hypotheses. How do I know whether it was effective? One thing was that the exam marks for this course were very high, but that in itself doesn't say anything, because some of the high marks, the scripts were exactly what I had said in the lecture, almost verbatim. So there wasn't any sign of it having gone through the students and having been processed in the middle. It just went in and went out. Not all of them were like that, but some of them were, so which makes me question the effectiveness. On the SCEF, they said Dr. Brady helped us learn, which of course is nice, and at the time I took that to mean, it has actually worked. But did it? Lastly, something I did with level 1 students was talk about cheesecakes. What I wanted to do was talk about the idea of how to evaluate a scientific article, how to know whether you should include something in your review. It's quite a difficult concept, evaluation. They don't find it easy at all. And so what I was trying to do was relate a difficult concept, evaluation, to something that they're already familiar with. Because there's a remarkable resemblance between how to evaluate an article and how to evaluate a cheesecake recipe. It's uncanny. So when I did that, what they perhaps might have felt was that because they could relate to it, they could fit it more easily into their existing schemas. They could relate to it. And in turn, and at the same time, that could have led to deeper learning because of understanding and a conceptual change. They would be able to talk about evaluating articles in a different way, seeing it in a new light that they've never seen it before. It also gave us, as a class, a new language. Whenever there was a difficult article and the students weren't sure whether to include this, what the value was, whether it was a good or bad article, I would ask them, if it was a recipe, would you use it? And why? And that enabled us to talk about difficult articles in that way, which was really good. And they all said it really helped. The problem was nobody had baked a cake before. It was the first week of term and the majority hadn't got past the baked beans and toast stage. So they couldn't directly relate to the conundrum of trying to find a reliable recipe, but they got the idea. So let's come back to this how do I know question, because I feel that I haven't really answered that question, and I find it really hard to do because I don't have any objective evidence. The only thing I feel I've got is the PT Cert material, the things I've read so far, and when I read about a particular teaching method that has led to a particular kind of learning, then what I try to do is see how similar is this method to what I'm doing in my course. Could it be that because this theory or this article has shown this type of task, this type of delivery leads to deep learning? Is it similar to what I do? Could it have been that I have also created deep learning in that way, for example? And I feel that's my strongest form of evidence. We have students self-reports when they say, Dr. Brady helped us learn, but we don't have another group that did not have me as their tutor or no tutor. How do we know that what I did actually was better than someone else or better than what they would have done on their own? I do not know. Exam marks are one thing, but how do we know that what I've done is not just a strategic approach? And why was it good? So I don't know. Again, there's no control group with exams. We don't know. We can't compare the students before my teaching and after. So I'm still trying to assess for sure whether what I did was effective. I only have indirect evidence, but I believe that we are going to look at this in the second part of the PT Cert course. So I'm really looking forward to that because I want to know. There were certain things that I believe were not effective. I tried to really simplify my level 2 lecture content. Instead of mentioning all the intricate details of theories, I focused on the bigger picture. And there's this niggly feeling that I did that because I wanted to be easy to follow. Other lectures might be difficult to follow, so if I'm easy, that makes me a hero. They enjoy my lectures and it becomes more entertainment than actual academic content. What that could have led to was the students' illusion that the material is easy. If they think it's easy, they're going to engage in surface learning rather than trying to go deep and trying to understand. Interestingly, my own heroes, my favorite lecturer when I was a student, Dietrich Stapel, after his fraud had come to light, I had a conversation with him and he confided that he did exactly the same thing. He simplified his lecture content to be liked, to be the hero, because he suffered from similar self-esteem problems as I did. So I was beating myself up about this. But then I thought, actually, hold on a second. If we look at the exam structure, could that have had something to do with it? They get 36 lectures, of which I created 3 exam questions in 2 hours. So that seems a bit out of proportion. They have to write an essay about it. So in order to be able to hit the target on those 3 questions, they've got to read this broad array of information. You can't, as a student, you can't possibly go deep into any of those things, otherwise you won't get it done. So are we promoting surface learning, and if so, is what I did in my lecture, simplifying it, is it actually, so in a reverted way, perfectly aligned with the exam? It's not good, but what I did may actually be, now I don't know this, I can't remember what I thought at the time, but it could be that I really tried to make what they did in the lectures very similar to what they had to do on the exam. So if we are to change what we do in the lectures, if we want to try to make students take a more deeper approach, then we also need to change the exam, and we need to change, well, for a start, the number of lectures to be able to go deeper. Something else that I thought was not very effective was when I gave students too little time to think. When I said to them, just spend 5 minutes on this task and then I'll ask you what you thought. 5 minutes for most tasks, this task that we're doing is quite short. So what I might have done was actually inadvertently encouraged a surface approach. They might not have gone very deep on that particular task. Also, what we do a lot of at level 1 is explaining to students how assessments are marked. And when you do that, when you explain it into quite meticulous detail, students will know exactly what to do, so they can go and jump through the hoops. So what that screams at is a strategic approach. That's of course what they do. Now I put inadvertently in parentheses there because I don't think I did that inadvertently. I think I was quite aware of wanting students to tick certain boxes. I wanted them to do well. That might not be the best thing to do, because if you do this at level 1, if you tell them all the assessment details, they know which hoops they have to jump through, it could give them the wrong learning habits for the years to come. They might think always that always the assessment details are being given, which might not be the case, and it just might give them the idea that they don't have to go deep, but they can take on this jump through the hoops approach. So how have I and my teaching changed? Quite a bit. I feel I've dramatically changed in the past few weeks. It's had a huge impact on the way I see my teaching and the way I see myself. So do I feel the same way as in the beginning, so responsible? Well, actually, I still feel responsible, but I feel a different kind of responsible. I feel now that I've learned so much more about teaching, about learning. I feel it's more than ever my responsibility to make sure that I create the right learning climate to deliver high quality teaching that leads to high quality learning. And this is very much related to my changed assumptions about how students learn. I used to see them as clay, and as I was creating this video, quite spontaneously I came up with a new metaphor, because I related it to a garden. If you are completely ignorant about how to tend a garden, then it's just a matter of luck whether you get certain flowers or not. And you might think of watering some of them every now and then, but you wouldn't spend so much time on getting a nice garden. But once you know about horticulture, once you know what you have to do to get certain flowers, to get them to grow to their optimum, you feel that you have to, because you have that knowledge, you feel responsible. And when I thought that, I thought, hey, I actually have changed from clay. I'm now seeing students as a garden, as a plant, as a flower, and I want to do my best to help them grow into the best they can be. So what I need to take into account is students' existing knowledge. That they're not clay. They have come from somewhere. They are in a particular soil. They've had teaching before. They've got schemas. They've got knowledge. So what I need to focus on is not just information transfer to a blank sheet, but accommodation. Actually trying to change their schemas, add on to their schemas, which is actually assimilation, and help them to transform, help them to see their world in a different way. So the student as a garden or as a plant, that's my new analogy, a new metaphor of thinking about the way students learn. I've also started to question my own actions, and I have not done anything in the past few weeks for which I haven't had a good reason. All the teaching I've done, I've completely given it an overhaul, and really just put everything up for scraps and thought, why am I doing this? And if I have no good reason, I'm not doing it. But in doing so, and I've talked a little bit about that already, so what I did right and what I did wrong, so to speak, but it's also made me question the way things are done in psychology in general. Things like, what's the educational sense of word limits? Does that not just promote strategic and surface learning? Why is it that students are so scared of lecturers? That's not right. Students should be able to feel part of our community. There should be legitimate peripheral participation. Why is it that we only do summatives across the whole of level 1? I put in one formative, which of course was completely ignored because if it's in between all the summatives, they've already adopted a strategic approach, so the formative is not for a mark, it doesn't count. And that happens everywhere in our school. So do we foster a strategic approach when we have 100 MCQ questions to answer in 1 hour? Is that stimulus response behavior? Is that behaviorist? Something that we wouldn't dream of saying out loud. And do our students, all of our students, actually end up with graduate attributes? That's quite a big question that I want to look at in the months to come. I've also really become aware of constructive alignment and the need to give learning outcomes to students, to explain to them, how does this help you get certain skills? How is this related to what you're doing when you graduate? And how is this tested on the exams? So wherever possible, I have made sure that I've given students all of this information. And related to that, I'm trying to climb down from my hero status, which sometimes is quite hard because you can't do very much about what you feel. And I still, it sounds really sad, but I love a crying student in my office because it gives me an opportunity to help them. But I've changed the way that I help them, the actual thing that I do. Rather than helping them immediately in the short term, I'm giving them the tools so they can help themselves. When a student comes to me and says, I can't find article XYZ, rather than actually giving them the article, which I would have done before, I now show them how they can use the library catalogue to find it for themselves. When a student comes to me crying with whatever problems that might be, rather than trying to sort it out for her, I will either point her to the student support or try and make her think about it, her or himself. So I'm trying to do what's best for the students in the long term, rather than doing what makes me look a hero. And I'm still consciously working on that. So what I'm going to do next, there are certain things that I want to do. I'm not sure if I'll be able to do them all, but I'm very much hopeful. One thing I think will benefit me very much is adopting a transpersonal orientation to reflection, where I think about how I could integrate my personal growth with my vocation. If I apply the SMART approach, although this is not really something that you can time, it's something that develops over the years. But so in the short term, I could start with reading articles about transpersonal orientation. I don't really want to get into sort of Buddhism side that was also recommended somewhere. I do want to stay on academic ground. I'm going to read that in the second semester because I think it's important to do that alongside your teaching, so I could do some reflection in action. I'd also like to have a talk with Doug, my colleague, who got a teaching award last year. So he's obviously good at what he does. The students like him. How did that affect him? Did it go to his head? How does he manage to sort of not be too much of a hero, but integrate his personal growth with being good at his job? How does he do that? And the time to do that is probably best in the quiet time in January when we've all finished our marking. So once I've done that, I'm going to take some time to reflect. Once I've done that, try to come up with some kind of mantra, my teaching motivation in a few paragraphs. I want to stick that on my wall, look at it every day, and in general take a mindful approach. But this is something that I can't really set a time to say that I want to have done this by so and so. It's something that I'm starting now, and it'll probably never end because you always keep growing. The other thing I want to do is learn more about student motivation. That really caught my interest, and especially the bit about how to motivate those who don't really know why they are at university. How can I make those intrinsically motivated? So what I want to do is read. I like to read about the background theories and take it from there, seeing what else I can find. I like to do that during the Christmas break when I have a bit more time. Also, if you want to know about student motivation, what makes them tick, I think I could actually talk to students and find out, because they probably know. They may not, but they may. I've got personal QT meetings in early 2015, so I can have a chat with them then. And also talk to a selection of colleagues to see what they do to help foster motivation, help to deal with how they deal with students who appear to lack motivation. Obviously everyone is motivated to some extent, but how do you deal with the perhaps lesser motivated? And the time to do that is again in the quiet time in early January. After I've read, talked and discussed, again I'm going to reflect, and whatever I come up with I'm going to try out either in the second semester or in the new season and see if it actually makes a difference. Hopefully by then I will also have the tools to test whether it has been effective. The last thing, I started working on this presentation quite early on, and this is one of the things I said, I want to set up a study skill class to help students learn more effectively. Since learning reading Martens and Prosser, I can take a big cross across that, because first and foremost what I think we should do is start from ourselves. We have the knowledge about teaching. It's our responsibility to create a climate in which we have high quality teaching, which will lead to high quality learning. That's our responsibility. Then we can look at perhaps helping students who can't learn so effectively, but we start with ourselves. Now this is quite a delicate thing, I think. First of all, I need to have a chat with our head of teaching to see if this is alright for me to pursue. That is the same person who said anyone can teach, so that should be quite interesting. Then I want to create an inventory of learning outcomes. What do we want students to do, to be able to do in each year? And based on that, what are actually the weak spots? Some lectures that are delivered in a way that doesn't align with the learning outcomes. Exams that in their structure, in their format, don't align with what we want them to learn. Pressures of group sizes, too few lecturers, things like that, the weak spots. So once I've done that, well, I'll do that in the summer or autumn 2015, when I hope I'll be given some time to do that. Whatever I discover, I want to discuss again with the head of teaching, and something will happen in that meeting, I'm sure, where we decide together, and perhaps with other people, whether there's anything that needs changing and what that is. And then somehow disseminate this, somehow explain this to the other members of our department, perhaps in a staff meeting, perhaps one-to-one. I have not worked that out yet. It depends in part on what my head of teaching says and whether he thinks it's something that is worth pursuing. But I am very passionate about changing things, because from what I can see so far, there is a lot that we can do to make it better for students. So in sum, I'd like to come back to this picture that we drew in the reflection workshop about our motivation for teaching. So if I map my respective status onto that, in the beginning I had hero status when I was in primary school. I went through a mouse phase, and then again when I got my teaching fellow job, I felt a hero again. So I'm now going to extend this line, because my motivation for teaching, because of this course, has increased more than ever. It's been fantastic, because I feel right now I don't have, not only have more knowledge, but I've got different knowledge. I can see my own teaching in a completely new light, so it's been a conceptual change in me. I feel that right now I'm a more balanced educator who can engage in informed reflection, and based on that, with all those tools, can actually change things in me when I think they need changing, and change things in the School of Psychology as a whole. So for me it has been the best learning experience of my life so far, and I can't wait for what's to come next. So thank you very much for listening and watching.